nowadays you got to have that kind because people nowadays.
Before we get straight into the podcast, I just want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors, Declan Kirby GAA Star. Declan Kirby GAA Star Championship Journey. It's a series of GAA team children's books written by primary school teacher and GAA coach Michael Egan. You can check it out in the link in the description down below, of course, as well. Follow the trials and tribulations of Declan Kirby and his team at Smithgreen Gaelic Football Club, recently formed but promising GAA team. The book is now available in Easons and all good bookshops, so check it out in the description down below, and let's get straight into it. Welcome back to the GAA Fan TV podcast. My name is Aaron. I'm delighted to be joined here by Matthew Hurley from the GAA Statsman podcast. We're going to be running through the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship. We're going to be reviewing the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship in greater detail. We're going to be grading every county from A to F based on their performance in 2021 in the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship, and obviously in the league as well. We'll compare the two together and in terms of how counties performed in the entirety of the championship. So we'll be going through each county individually. We'll go through the Joe McDonald Cup teams briefly as well, and also I suppose we'll touch on some of the lower tier hurling sides as well from the Christie Ring and whatnot, but we won't go in too much detail. We'll focus on, I suppose, the Munster and the Leinster sides, and I suppose we'll start with the Munster Championship match. We'll get straight into it. I suppose Cork, first of all, that was the team I wanted to start with, obviously, because you're a Cork man yourself, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts, I suppose, after the Limerick defeat. Like, how, I suppose, a few weeks have passed now. Like, how's the form after that defeat? Because it was a heavy defeat, but I suppose at the same time, like, Limerick were just immense on the day.
Exactly what the word you robbed the words out of my mouth, Aaron. Yeah, Cork were just a bit behind Limerick, but I suppose like the footballers was a bit disgraceful after the Kerry performance. I thought there was more in the team, but against Limerick, like this Limerick team, just a monster of a side. And no matter what they did at the end, like cracking hurleys and, you know, dirty fouls and all that, throughout the game, they were just outstanding. And we simply had no answer to it. I suppose when Kingston scored, the whole of Cork started jumping up and down and the fans inside the stadium, but it just wasn't to be. Look, Limerick, just a much better side. But the season overall, look, it was improvement considering we lost to Tipperary in the qualifiers in 2020. Cork Hurling looked to be on a bit of a downer, but we brought in the young players. And look, we beat Kilkenny, we beat Dublin, Clare. I suppose most people say it'd probably be an easier side to draw rather than the likes of Waterford and Tipperary, who we'll get on to later. But look, this Cork team, look, it's improving. Limerick were just a much better team, and I suppose the main aim for Cork next year is to win a Munster Championship. That's the start, and then we can go on towards All Irelands. And another interesting aspect is Hoggy. How long will he go? I think he's going to go again next year. Like, he's going to be 34 next year. And look at the young players coming through. You'd be thinking Hoggy's will be kind of stupid to retire now, because I think Cork Hurling is definitely on the up. But there's a question when this Cork team will win the All-Ireland, because this Limerick team, it doesn't seem like it's going to stop anytime soon. They look like the Dublin of today, and they look like they're going to win the All-Ireland the years to come. So it'll be interesting in the next few years, but definitely progress for Cork, but Limerick, the much better team.
Yeah, like when you got that goal as well from Shane Kingston, like you were saying before, like, because Limerick don't concede that many goals normally, like, and you seen Shane Kingston bursting down the left-hand side, just run straight through the Limerick defence. You thought, Jesus, maybe Cork might actually be onto something today, like, because that's their strengths really, is getting those goals, and Shane Kingston starting the game on a, like, you know, a house on fire. But Limerick just nullified it straight away. So I suppose, like, it was like really impressive from a Limerick point of view. But I suppose for Cork in general, like, what would you grade them then on the season? I suppose on 2021 in general, what would you go for?
I don't know, will my fellow Corkmen be angry about this, but I've down here Cork as a B. I think, look, it's a fair assessment. Look, we're in the All-Ireland final. We finished mid-table in the league. And I suppose most people would argue we were on the easier side of the draw compared to the likes of Waterford and Tipperary. And the two games against Limerick, yes, in the Munster Championship, we were beaten. quite comprehensively, but I don't think Limerick were at their best that day. And then the final, obviously, we were destroyed. So, and you have to take into consideration, Clare could have beat us in the qualifier as well if things went differently. That Tony Kelly shot, brilliant save by Pat Collins. Dublin, obviously, had the COVID issue. We don't know how they could have really recovered from it after a 2-week layoff. And Kilkenny, who traditionally this year anyway struggled against Munster counties, and they took us extra time in the position where we shouldn't have really got the extra time. We should have cleared the ball out. But overall, I'd probably give us a B. Look, it's progress, as I said, and I think other counties are slightly ahead of us. It showed against Limerick. Yes, Limerick were the much better side, but you'd have to question, would a side like Waterford or Tipperary or any of them, would it challenge Limerick more? It'll be an interesting aspect to see it that way, but overall a B, I think.
Yeah, I've gone for a B as well, actually. I think, I don't think you can give them an A or anything like that. I know getting to the All-Ireland final is a big achievement, but I think a county like Cork really should be, an A should be an All-Ireland for them, considering their history, the second most successful team at All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship level. And obviously haven't won an All-Ireland in such a long time. So I don't think you can quite justify an A. And like what you said before there as well, their route to the final, I think that's kind of what people are kind of questioning, is they didn't have to play a Waterford, they didn't have to play a Tipperary, they didn't have to play a Galway. And I suppose it is worth remembering that Galway and Tipperary probably flattered to deceive in the championship anyway. So, who's to say Cork wouldn't have beat them along the way? But yeah, I suppose it's an interesting one, because it's like, you see some people and you're saying, if Cork actually progressed, have they actually made progress? What do you think? Do you think you have made progress, or is it still maybe, going along the kind of same levels as what we've seen before?
I don't think it's the levels we've seen before, because 2016, you could go back, we lost to Wexford, and that was a disgrace coming back to Cork. Even 2015, we got hammered by Galway at Simple Stadium, and the fans, it was getting nasty that day, and Cork Hurling was on a downer that time. And even when we won Munster in the semi-finals, we just seemed to be off the pace a bit. This year, once we got to the semi-finals, we blew Kilkenny out of the water in the second half. We should have won the game in normal time, but we didn't. But I suppose it's the first All-Ireland final appearance since 2013. That is progress, in my opinion, no matter how easy the route was. But look at our youngsters coming through, an under 20 and minor. We obliterated them championships this year, and that could usually be said about a Cork minor team or under 20 team in the last few years. That's the grades we historically struggled in over the last few years. So, look, I think it's progress for this Cork team. Yes, you're correct in saying All-Ireland is the pinnacle for Cork, but look, you have to start somewhere. You have to start at the bottom. You can't start at the top. And this Cork team has progressed, in my opinion. And the question is, when will they win this All-Ireland? Because this Limerick team doesn't seem like it's going to stop. That's the only negative about the season for Cork, because Limerick are just so good at the moment.
Yeah, I'd agree with you as well. I think any side that really gets to an All-Ireland final on any level, really, considering, where they've been over the past couple of years, I think it definitely is progress. Although you could argue maybe just the teams that they've come up against, but I suppose at the same time, Kilkenny are still a top class team. They've been thereabouts for the past couple of years. They've all Ireland winners in there, and it wasn't like they breezed past Kilkenny or anything like that. They had to come from behind. They had to really, really work for it. So, yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that one. And looking at the final again, I suppose a lot of people, I've seen on Twitter and whatnot, maybe saying it was a bit embarrassing for Cork, and maybe this defeat might set them back, a number of years. I don't know what you think personally. I actually disagree with that kind of analogy, really, because I do think you do have a number of players coming through at under 20 level. You won the delays 2020 final, and then you won the 2021 final as well. You've great minors coming through. So, okay, yeah, fair enough. Patrick Horgan might retire maybe in the next couple of years, but you're in as good a position as anyone really to stop Limerick's dominance, you'd have to say, over the next couple of years.
Definitely agree with you there, absolutely. And you look at even I was looking back at the 2013 panel that reached the All-Ireland final. Only 2 remain this year in Patrick Horgan and Seamus Hartley. So, look, the squad is very young. There's going to be wins in the next few years, but we have to take our beatings first. Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. So, look, this Cork team will improve, but I even go back to Waterford against Kilkenny in 2008. That was a demolition that day, and you could have easily said Waterford would lie down. 2 years later, they win a Munster championship under Davy Fitz. So, look, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think this Cork team has potential, and it definitely proved that potential this season. It did the previous seasons, especially last season when we lost to Waterford in the Munster Championship. So, look, it is progress. I think, will we win an All-Ireland next year? I don't think so. The only reason really is because Limerick are just so far ahead of us. Will we win us in 3 or 4 years? I think so. Yes, I think we have an excellent crop of young players coming through. I think Kieran Kingston, he takes no favourites in the team. You look at him dropping his son Shane in the semi-final. Like, that mustn't have been easy whatsoever. And then Shane proves him wrong and scores 7 points against Kilkenny when coming on. So, look, there's no favouritism with the manager. And then you look at the coaching staff we have at the moment in the Rock. We have Donal O'Grady. We have Joe Cunningham as well, who did reasonably well enough with Dublin as well. And he knows Cork hurling inside out. So, look, the future's on the up for this Cork team. But the key for the Cork fans is just to be patient with them. Don't slag them off. Just forget about it. Put this result under the carpet and move on to next year, because I think we have the players to definitely win the All-Ireland within the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously they were coming up against one of the great teams in Limerick. Like, and I mean, their performance in that final in particular was unbelievable. Like, and we'll get on to them in a moment. I suppose we'll continue along the lines of Munster, and I suppose we'll go in alphabetical order. We'll have a look at Clare. I suppose like an interesting season for Clare. I mean, they were beaten by Antrim on the opening day in the league. And I don't think many people could have imagined really the turnaround that they had and some of the hurling that they played. Like, fair enough, they got beaten the second round of the qualifiers, but given that they brought through players like Aidan McCarthy and Mark Rogers and, you know, Tony Kelly still in there, like, it's still a positive year for Clare, in my opinion. They showed a lot of progress. And like what you said, like if that chance for Tony Kelly goes in the back of the net, I mean, they probably would have beat Dublin. Who knows, against Kilkenny? We could have been talking about Clare going up against Limerick in an All-Ireland final. So, you know, that save by Patrick Collins in many ways was kind of like a sliding doors moment, because it allowed Cork to go on, and obviously it knocked Clare out. But what would you give them anyway? I've gone with a C personally. I think it's a progress, definitely in my opinion. But obviously they do want to still be striving to get back to where they were, I suppose, in 2013.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with you, Aaron. I put down the C as well. I think, look, it wasn't above expectations. It wasn't below expectations. It's where Clare are at the moment. Like, the young players will improve over the next few years. And you could say over the 2 games that they got knocked out in, Tipperary especially, I thought, was a disgraceful decision to get Tipperary back in the game. And Clare should have won that game in the Munster semi-final. You could see the expression of Brian Lohan's face afterwards. Then against Wexford, they could have easily laid down and just felt sorry for themselves, but they came out of the traps firing in that game in the first half, and ultimately that's what won it for them. Against Cork, you could argue Clare would have been in the All-Ireland final, but you could also argue Patrick Collins kind of saved Clare, because Clare might have got a hammering in the All-Ireland final. And
yeah,
look, you could look at it that way, definitely, but and it was a saving grace. So Pat Collins is going to get a statue outside Cusack Park. You never know, but I suppose, yeah, C is probably the fair assessment here. I think they didn't perform above expectations, below expectations, and I suppose against Antrim we might have said Clare were disgraced that day, but maybe it was because John Conlon, let's not forget, was in his first day at centre back. He's proved to be a very good centre back, very good option for Clare this season. So they were building the team that time, a new team under Brian Lohan, and the news that just came out over the last few weeks, Brian Lohan is going to stay with Clare, I believe. So thank God for that, because he's an absolute excellent coach for Clare and deserves more recognition. And he is a passion for Clare hurling, and he's definitely the right man to take these young players forward. So if Tony Kelly's firing on all cylinders next year, and these young lads, like, as you said, Mark Rogers or Cathal Malone or Aidan McCarthy fire next year, Clare could do well next year, maybe even a Munster final appearance. And on a good day against Limerick, where Limerick are off with a small bit and Clare are bang on it, who knows? But for now, C is probably a fair assessment.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you on that one. Like, and like even looking through, like I'm seeing there, like they actually, like at the time of when they got knocked out of the championship, like they created more chances than anyone else, and they had more wides than anyone else in the championship at that moment in time. And that kind of tells you that the potential is there. Like if you're creating those chances and you've players like Tony Kelly, Aidan McCarthy, you know, maybe you've a couple of players back from injury next year and a few more, you know, younger players come into the panel. Fair enough, their underage setup doesn't look too good at the moment compared with other counties, but like when they're creating those chances and creating those opportunities, like they definitely have a chance to go on and maybe do something kind of special next year.
Absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned they're underage. It's kind of a terrible year for Clare, but they got hammered by Cork in the first day. But when you consider that Cork minor team hammered everybody else in that championship, maybe it doesn't look so bad for Clare. Just Cork were just unbelievable. Look, so I think there is positives for this Clare team, and if they keep Lohan over the next few years, they keep these young players grounded. Tony Kelly stays around for the next few years. I think he's in his mid-20s now, if I'm not mistaken. So he has a good few years left ahead of him. So look, this Clare team has the potential to fire. I think if they improve in their shooting next year, who knows where they can go. But for now, I think, look, it was a progress of a season for Clare. Look, they lost to Antrim and yeah, people were saying disgraceful. But at the end of the season, Clare fans are pretty happy with the season gone by. So look, there's positive signs for Clare, especially if Brian Lohan stays for the next few years, definitely.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big thing as well as the Brian Lohan situation. Like, does he stay or does he not stay? And I suppose there's been some discussion about him staying, and I've seen a few of the Clare players, Tony Kelly in particular, talking about, you know, how he needs to stay. And, you know, that would be a big worry, wouldn't it, if he wasn't kept on? Because, you know, you'd have to wonder then is, you know, because all the question marks have been over Clare in the past couple of years have been about the county board and behind the scenes and what's going on. And I certainly don't know all the ins and outs of what is going on and what isn't going on, but it would be worrying, in my opinion, if they didn't keep Brian Lohan on, because I do think he's made progress. He's made changes to the team. He's done the hard part a little bit by bringing through Aidan McCarthy, Mark Rogers, a few of the other lads. He's had to change the backroom team, you know, and obviously competing with Limerick, who've just rose through the ranks in recent seasons. So that would be a worry, wouldn't it, if he wasn't kept on? Because then you'd probably have to say that there's probably much bigger problems going on behind the scenes at Clare at the moment.
There is big problems. I've been hearing for months about Clare fans there is problems behind the scenes. I really feel sorry for the Clare fans because they deserve a lot better. They're a historic hurling county. They won the All-Ireland as recently as 2013. So they are a big hurling county. And look, as I mentioned with Cork, Rome wasn't built to the day. Brian Lohan, maybe the first 2 years weren't perfect for Clare, but you could see the guy he's building. He's building this team and to bigger and better things. Like, I even go to, I suppose, the Premier League a few years ago. Like, Tottenham finished 5th under Pochettino in 2015, and people were saying, is he good enough for Tottenham and all that? The next season, Tottenham finished 3rd, and then they finished 2nd, and it was progress for them. Maybe they didn't win a trophy afterwards, but they were competitive in the Champions League even. So the same situation applies to Clare. Look, he's building a team. You have to be patient with him. The Clare County Board have to be patient with him. It's so crucial that this happens. And to keep players like Tony Kelly happy, because if Tony Kelly isn't happy, what's the point in having him? Because, you know, if he's not happy playing, he's hurling, doing his skills, what's the point in having him? And what's the point in playing for Clare? Like, so Brian Lohan, it's essential he stays in this Clare team, because without him, I don't know who they'll go for, to be honest, because there's no better man other than himself and Davy Fitz. Well, let's be honest, Davy Fitz not going to go back to Clare. So other than Davy Fitz and Brian Lohan, there isn't really that fella with a bit of passion in Clare. So I suppose Brian Lohan is the guy to take them forward, but the county board, it's so crucial. They have to be patient and give him another 2 or 3 years at least.
We'll move on to Limerick anyways. And I suppose Limerick, like, I mean, it's an obvious A. I mean, there's no arguments with that whatsoever. I mean, and just looking through their whole 2021 as a whole, like I remember going back to the league and they were beaten by Galway, beaten by Waterford. And maybe some people were starting to question Limerick and maybe thinking, are they the same team as what they did last year? You know, can they go and win back-to-back All-Irelands, which obviously they hadn't done for, you know, quite a long time. So, or I don't think they've done in their history. So, I mean, to go and do that, go and win the All-Ireland, but not just win the All-Ireland, like the way they done it, 10 points down against Tipperary, came back and blitzed them, comfortably seen off Waterford, never in doubt. And then obviously just completely blitzed Cork, like what we were saying before, like 3-18 in the first half. I mean, to rack up a score like that in 35 minutes of hurling at any level really is just incredible stuff. And I mean, like we truly are witnessing one of the best teams of a generation, it has to be said.
Absolutely. Just a superb team, a historical team, definitely for the ages. And even going back to your point there, 3-18 in the first half, 3-16 came from play in that half. Like, my God, like you'd never, ever see that in an All-Ireland final again. It was absolutely incredible. Just all their forwards just seemed to click. Like, Garrod Haggerty wasn't performing well, for example, up until the final. And then, boom, he scores 2-2 in the first half. Like, that's a sign these Limerick players, when something isn't right in the last few games, they could just turn it on just like that. And you look at Cian Lynch as well. Jeez, the guy is an absolute baller. And you look at Tom Morrissey, maybe a bit underrated in the half forward line. Well, to be fair, the other two might seem to do all the skills and the tricks, but he seems to do all the dirty work. Aaron Galan is another player, maybe overlooked a bit this year. Peter Casey could have been down and out after the semi-final dismissal. He goes and scores 5 points in the first half. Like, every one of them players were at it. You look at Sean Finn in the backs. I haven't seen a player as consistent as him over the last few years. Maybe Paul Flynn in football for Dublin, getting multiple All-Stars in a row. Nicky Quaid, superb goalkeeper. Like, every position in that team, like, you could argue who in the country would get in that Limerick team. I suppose Tony Kelly, there's an argument for Tony Kelly, TJ Reid, Hoggy, maybe. But other than that, it's an absolute superb team, and they're strong, they're fit, they're athletic. You even look at their midfielders as well. Will O'Donoghue, Darragh O'Donovan getting up and down the field. What a team. And they'll probably go on and win. They could be a team that could replicate Dublin's 5 in a row. Definitely. Maybe even more, because I don't see this Limerick team stopping. No matter how improved Cork have been, or Liam Sheedy leaving Tipperary, and surely they'll bring through the youngsters next year, the exciting youngsters, Liam Cahill staying at Waterford, that doesn't matter. If this Limerick team is honest again and again and again, they'll blitz everybody next year. And I suppose hurling is dead that way, but I suppose every fan just has to sit back and admire this team, because it's just a wonder to watch.
Yeah, and I do think it is a realistic goal as well for Limerick at this stage, like considering they've won 2 All-Irelands in a row, they've won 3 in the last 4 years. And like what you said, like they just have so much influence all across the pitch. I mean, from Garrod Haggerty, like what you said, he scored 2-2 in the final. Like, if one player doesn't turn up, they'll have someone else to turn up. Like Cian Lynch will step it up, and then Tom Morrissey will. You've got Graham Mulcahy coming off the bench. Shamey Flanagan's obviously, he was coming off the bench last year. He's come into the starting 15 this year, and he's been very impressive as well, and a very underrated player in a full forward. So they just do seem to have so many options all across the pitch. And like what you said, it's an interesting point that I suppose I didn't really think about when you were saying what other players would maybe make it into the Limerick team. And you could argue, yeah, maybe Tony Kelly could get in there, Patrick Horgan, but I think if it was John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk, they'd probably just say, look, listen, we'll stick to what we have here, because it's not just the scoring or the points or the tricks and all the rest. It's just the way they all play together. They all seem to kind of play on the same wavelengths. Like, they look like they've been doing it for the past 10 years. Like, and you do forget as well, like they've such a young team, like such a 2018, there was a lot of players who came up from the under 20 side in 2017. So like it is mad to think, and they definitely could be a side to really kick on and dominate over the next couple of years now.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing as well that struck me, I think it was John Kiley or Garrod Haggerty, one of them, maybe both said this, but each and every one of them players will die for each other. They'll die out in the pitch. They'll die trying. They're just a superb outfit, and they don't just have skill. They have tenacity. They want to win, and that's just a sign of an unbelievable side. And you'd be right in saying, yes, Tony Kelly, Patrick Horgan, TJ Reid, outstanding players, outstanding individual players. But that team unity, that team bond, it'll be probably broken if one of them players come in all honesty. Like, even they'd even take one of the bench players above him, because at least they both have, they know what the panel is about, and they are super players coming off the bench as well. Like, you even look at the young players coming through as well. Cathal Coughlin from centre back, Cathal O'Neill from the forwards. Like, this is just going to continue year on year. And you look at even Pat Ryan, who's in and out of the team, superb player. David Reedy, like Seamus Flanagan was a bench player last year, the year before, and he's come in and done an outstanding job. Peter Casey was on the bench in the 2018 All-Ireland final. So, look, it's a bit like Dublin. It reminds me of Dublin, definitely in the 2000s, that 5-in-a-row team. If one player isn't performing at top notch, another player will come in and strike 5 points. That's just the nature of Limerick. They're a superb outfit. Definitely deserve an A in this, and they'll probably win, I would say, 4 or 5 in a row, maybe even 6 or 7. We'll never know, but it's an absolute superb team, superbly coached, and a witness, and joy to witness.
Yeah, and it's mad to think as well, like how far they've come, because obviously you mentioned Dublin there, like winning 5 in a row, and fair enough, Dublin went 16 years without winning an All-Ireland, but Dublin are Dublin, with all due respect, to the capital city. They've obviously played a majority of their games in Croke Park. They've, a huge amount of resources that obviously is well documented at this stage. Limerick, on the other hand side of things, like they went 45 years without winning an All-Ireland. Made a couple of All-Ireland final appearances here or there, but I can even think back to, funny enough, when Limerick played Dublin, actually, I think it was 2015 or 2016 or something like that, in a qualifier game, and I think Limerick beat us by a point, or we beat them by a point. But I remember coming out of the game and thinking, Jesus, like we should have beat Limerick that day. Like we, like being disappointed with the result, like, and it does show like how far they've come, and certainly, like, I'm hoping to maybe get someone on the inside and from Limerick to come on the podcast at some stage to discuss it more, because it is just mad, like 45 years without winning All-Ireland, and then they go and they win 1, they win 3 Munster titles, and 2 more All-Irelands, 3 National Leagues. Like, it's incredible stuff. And whether it's JP McManus or Paul Kinnerk or John Kiley, I mean, a huge amount of credit has to go to all of them, really, because to turn things around the way they did, like, I mean, it does just go to show that you can go from being, huge underdogs to serial winners in the GAA. Like, it isn't impossible.
Absolutely. And even look, I suppose even recent history, 2015, I remember Limerick were playing your County Dublin in an All-Ireland qualifier. I don't know, is that the game you're thinking of? They were cruising at halftime, and then lads like David Dotsy O'Callaghan and Paul Ryan and all of them drove Dublin back into the game, and Dublin won it. And you'd be questioning, where is Limerick hurling going here? Because no disrespect to Dublin, they were growing under Joe Cunningham that time, but you were questioning that, where is Limerick hurling going? And then they lose to Clare in 2016, the qualifiers. And 2017, it was a year that kind of struck me. Like, Cork started performing well. We beat Tipperary in the first round of Munster. And I was just chatting to a few friends in my old school about our plot to the Munster final. Like, we were going to go into the Waterford game, and I was thinking, look, we're on the hard side of the draw. And then the other side, you have to look at Clare, Limerick. And one of my friends corrected me saying, look, Clare, decent side, Tony Kelly and all that. And he ultimately dismissed Limerick. That's what we thought of Limerick in 2017 now. This was the year before they won the All-Ireland. They were dumped out of the All-Ireland Championship then by Kilkenny in the qualifiers, where they didn't perform well at all. And then 2018, they win the All-Ireland. So it's a testament to what John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk and JP McManus have done. It isn't, it isn't, you would argue it was driven by money, but when you look at the years before that, it was qualifier defeat after qualifier defeat. And you had to question, where was Limerick going at that point? A year later, in 2018, they win the All-Ireland. They win 3 All-Irelands out of the next 4 years. The rest is history. Look, it's a superb job that all of them have done, and they definitely deserve credit for that.
Yeah, like, and I suppose the money thing kind of always gets thrown at counties, when they start being successful. Like, you're seeing a few people do it with Offaly now at the moment, and like, I'd have to disagree. Like, I think fair enough. Like, I can understand maybe why some people want to discredit other counties' achievements, but I think it's not just as simple as, this isn't FIFA or Ultimate Team or anything like that. You can't just throw money at something and then, all of a sudden start buying all the best players. Like, there's a lot of work that needs to go into it at underage level, facilities, conditioning, everything needs to be right from the top all the way down to the bottom. And yeah, like what you said with John Coyley, like he was obviously manager back in 2017 when they actually got beat. Like, and I think some people forget that. Like, and obviously the Limerick County Board, they stuck with him. And in 2018, you know, he had the ultimate achievement. And it is mad to think with John Coyley because he sort of probably doesn't get the credit he deserves, in my opinion. And I think it's probably partly down to him as well because he does such a good job at complimenting Paul Kinnerk. And he was even saying in a press conference, I think after the Waterford game, that it was Paul Kinnerk who made the switch at one of the water breaks. So like he's so brilliant at giving other people the credit and giving players the credit. But like he has to take a huge amount of credit as well because, you know, to win those 3 All-Irelands and to be the manager and to manage that team and to get them playing the way they have been playing. I mean, it's incredible stuff from John Coyley.
It is incredible stuff. And it's interesting, you go back to the money issue. I suppose you could argue Dublin, Offaly, Limerick, disgrace. But the reason people are saying disgrace and all that is because they don't look into the details of what they do with that money. Prime example would be my own county, Cork, how we spent the money over the last few years. There's no point in putting money into something if there's no plan behind it. And a prime example would be the footballers with us as well. I don't think Ronan McCarthy, for example, is good enough for the Cork footballers. And we have money behind us with the Sports Direct deal. Again, there's no point in putting money and resources into it unless you don't have the right men in place at the start. You look at Limerick and Dublin, you look at Offaly now with Shane Lowry and Michael Duignan. All these counties have something in common. They have the right men in the right place at the right time doing their stuff. And that has to be credited. This money thing, look, it has to be done correctly first. You can't just do a financial takeover, as you said rightly in FIFA, and expect everything to be rosy in the garden. Work has to be done behind the scenes, definitely. And you look at Limerick and Dublin, it's proved dividends, and it's going to prove dividends to Offaly for the next few years as well. So, look, you can't just throw money at the situation and expect everything to be all right again. There's work that needs to be done behind the scenes. The prime example would be Cork and how it's done badly. How it's done better would be Limerick, Dublin, and Offaly in the future, potentially.
Yeah, I suppose moving on, we'll discuss Tipperary. I suppose an interesting year for Tipperary. I mean, showed some good signs of hurling, like obviously got that win over Clare, but like what you said, obviously that was kind of, you know, I suppose overshadowed by the Aidan McCarthy incident, where obviously Tipperary got a penalty kind of, you know, down by the sideline. It should never have been given a penalty. So they showed some good signs of hurling, but in the end, like getting beat by Waterford, and obviously, you know, they had that 10-point lead against Limerick and threw that game away. Like they were extremely poor in the second half. So, I mean, what have you gone with here?
I don't know if most Tipperary fans agree with this. Maybe they'll say under this or over this. I'm going to go for D. I think, look, they beat Clare, they did a decent league campaign. Like in that first half against Limerick, you would have given A for that alone. But then the rest of the championship wasn't great whatsoever. They lost to Waterford. They weren't at it against Waterford. They missed some crucial goal chances. And imagine if Tipperary converted them goal chances, what would we be giving them here? But for now, yeah, D, I'd have to give, because C, in my eyes, probably in line with expectations. Tipperary have been under expectations over the last few years, and I think it was the right time for Liam Sheedy to go. It'll be interesting to see who replaces him now, because Liam Cahill obviously staying with Waterford. Davy Fitz maybe could go to Tipperary. That would be very interesting, but Micheál Donoghue seems to be the favourite. I don't know, would that be the right decision? I don't know what Tipperary fans think about that, but for now, it's a D is a fair assessment. And what disappointed me, as I've said previously in other videos, they didn't break through the young players enough. They just stuck with the old talent. I suppose Brendan Maher, Noel McGrath, they've done well over the last few years, but look, time moves on. And, you know, you did a scoring chart for Tipperary over the last few games, you know, in notes recently. I think Ronan Maher, their fullback, was in their top 6 scorers. You would expect Noel McGrath to be there, for example. He wasn't there. You could see he's past his best. Look, most of this Tipperary team is past their best. They should have brought through the young players this year. And for that, I'd have to give him a D.
Yeah, I probably will disagree with you at some point, but I've gone with a D as well, funny enough. Like, I think Yeah, I think like the first half against Limerick, I think was really like I was kind of close to giving them an F, to be honest with you. But I think after like in the first half against Limerick, they still were very, very impressive. Like they gave Limerick as good as a test as we've really seen over the past 2 years. Like they did have Limerick on the ropes. Fair enough. Limerick completely turned it around in the second half, but it is a game of two halves, and you can't dismiss what good hurling Tipperary showed in the first half. But like what you said, like it is an aging team, and I suppose Liam Sheedy probably didn't really bring through the younger players in the league. Like he didn't really test them out. And you would feel now with Liam Sheedy stepping away and someone coming in that isn't Liam Cahill, that there probably is going to be a real transition now for the next year or so for Tipperary. I mean, it could work in their favour. We've seen with Limerick when they brought through a number of players, in 2018, it worked very well for them. But I suppose it's going to be an interesting watch now for Tipperary over the next couple of years.
It is going to be interesting over the next couple of weeks. Never mind years, who they bring in as manager. Like Micheál Donoghue's been touted around as the favourite. I honestly don't know. Like he speaks well on podcasts, to be fair to him. He's a well-educated guy, but he's won one All-Ireland with Galway. I don't know, is that, considering the talent Galway have, I don't know, is that a real good achievement? Considering 2018, they were heavy favourites and lost the All-Ireland final. 2019, they finished in the group. So would that be an inspiring appointment for Tipperary? It's very hard to know. Like Davy Fitz is a bit like Jose Mourinho in soccer. It's a 1 year or 2 year fix. Tipperary need a future fix. So it's going to be hard to see where they go with. Like Liam Cahill would have been the obvious choice, but rightly so, he's stuck with Waterford. He wants to finish what he's already started. Fair play to him for that decision, but I'm not sure Tipperary fans would be happy with that. I don't think they'd be hating Liam Cahill or anything, but they would have wanted him to lead these young players into the senior team. And you look at some of them senior players now retired. Brendan Maher being the first of them over the last few weeks. So a lot of them are going to drop like flies, and them young players aren't getting the experience. So I don't know, would Tipperary be in a bit of rut in the next few years thinking about it? Like it's going to be a tough process to get through. It's going to be interesting who they appoint as manager in the next few weeks, first of all. And then will that manager bed in the young players what Liam Sheedy didn't do this year? So it's going to be very interesting to watch this. And yeah, Tipperary hurling could be in a bit of a rut over the next few years.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one, all right. I mean, they certainly do have a lot of good players coming through. The under-20s, obviously, they won an under-20 All-Ireland under Liam Cahill there not too long ago. So I suppose they do have the talent coming through, but it is a question of, you don't want to be, if you're rushing all the players in at the same time, like you kind of want to bring those players through slowly, through league games, maybe through when you have pre-season tournaments and whatnot. And it does feel like now they're going to have to probably like throw players into the deep end a bit. And like what you said there, like I do think Liam Cahill was right, in my opinion, actually, to stay at Waterford, because I understand maybe why a lot of people were kind of surprised. Like a lot of Tipperary fans I seen were very shocked by the fact that he wanted to stay at Waterford. But when you really look at it, like, who is he going to win an All-Ireland with quicker? I'd have to say Waterford at this moment in time, in my opinion. I think he has a settled squad there. He knows the players inside and out. And I suppose we'll speak about Waterford now. Like I've gone with, I've given them a B. Like I think on the basis of beating Galway and Tipperary, I think that's the main reason why I've kind of put them there. Like I think they had a very tough route to that All-Ireland semi-final, and they did actually have a lot of goal chances in that Limerick game as well. Like, and who knows, like if Austin Gleason puts one or two of them away, or they get a little bit more rub of the green, like maybe then they could have, brought it back a little bit closer. But I suppose it wasn't the second season syndrome that I think a lot of people thought Waterford would get under Liam Cahill. But I suppose at the same time, they will be disappointed once again to end the season on another defeat to Limerick.
I'd be surprised again, Aaron. I definitely agree with you. How long is this going to continue? But I'd give them a B as well. They against Limerick, they kind of got slaughtered, but at the same time, they were after their fourth week in a row. Like that's going to take a toll on the players. Like the first half, they came out flying out of the traps. And I suppose when Jamie Barron came into the team, they started performing well. And even you look at, they've unearthed a few gems in fairness to them, like Peter Hogan's done well at midfield. Austin Gleason, I've already said, he's just an unbelievable hurler. I don't think he gets the respect he deserves. You look at even the talent coming off the bench, and you have the mastermind behind it, Liam Cahill. Like, I suppose after the Laois game, people were maybe edging towards an F. in all honesty, because they were poor against Clare. Laois, maybe on another day, should have beat them. But then against Galway, that superb first half performance and first 20 minutes of the second half. And then against Tipperary, they took their goal chances when they got them. And the first half against Limerick, they performed well, but they just ran out of steam in the end. I suppose that was a topic that went long into the weeks afterwards. Should a hurling team be after 4 weeks? Like, I personally think they should. I think they need their break. But I suppose it was a COVID year, so hopefully this sort of situation never happens again. But as I said, yeah, be superb. And maybe people might argue that Waterford were the second best team in the country, considering one, they lost by less to Limerick, and two, they had a harder run to the semi-final at least than Cork did, beating Galway and Tipperary, who'd usually be thereabouts. So, look, it was a good year for Waterford yet again, and they'll improve even more now next year under Liam Cahill, and it's superb that he stayed on. He's done the right thing, and long live Waterford hurling, because look, it's looking rosy in the garden for them.
Yeah, like, and like what you said there, like, if you were to do a hurling power rankings, like, I'd probably have Waterford at number 2, actually, given the fact that, you know, they were in an All-Ireland final last year. It's not like this season. It's not like beating Galway and beating Tipperary, where, you know, once off, like, when you think about it, they beat Kilkenny last year as well. So they do seem to have a knack of beating big teams. It's just this Limerick side that they can't seem to get over. It seems to be the one team that they can't seem to beat at the moment. Jamie Barron as well, like, when he came back into the side, really came off the bench against Laois and against both Galway and Tipperary as well. Like, just a tremendous hurler, brilliant in the midfield. And, like, I do think as well, if Waterford had have gotten past Limerick and gotten past Cork, let's say, I think Jamie Barron and probably Austin Gleason as well would have been 2 real contenders for hurler of the year, and in particular Jamie Barron, because he was really, like, when you look at how much better they played when he's in the team, like, it's incredible stuff.
It is incredible, and I actually did a followers all-star team, and there was only 2 men other than Limerick players to get an all-star, and that 13 Limerick men. Like, that is unbelievable, and rightly so, an unbelievable Limerick team. But the 2 players were Jack O'Connor and Jamie Barron. That just shows how much of an influence he had in this Waterford team. When he came in against Galway, as I said before, Waterford were a bit of a rag order. They probably should have lost to Laois. Against Clare, they were very, very poor throughout the game, considering Clare had so many wides, and they didn't really put up a challenge. And instantly in the Galway game, he scores 4 points. What a superb performance. And he controlled the midfield in that day. And you look at the game against Tipperary, again, he scores 4 points. Superb performance. Like, and against Limerick in the first half, again, pretty good, and held his own against that brilliant Limerick midfield. So, yeah, he was a revelation coming into that Waterford team in the 2021 championship. You look at Austin Gleason, unbelievable performance. Stephen Bennett putting over frees. I think their wing backs performed well as well. Kieran Bennett and Caleb Lyons yet again performed decent. I suppose wasn't as good as last year, people might argue, but he was definitely thereabouts for at least a nomination for an All-Star. He was brilliant. Conor Prunty at full back. They have a very nice team coming around, and they'd be a team to fear over the next few years. But I suppose there is the argument they're the Mayo of hurling. Whenever they go to the final, they choke. But I suppose the players they have, it's absolutely incredible. And Waterford hurling seems to be on the up, and Liam Cahill seems to be getting a very, very good team in place for 2022.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, all right. And you do wonder as well why they still don't bring back Maurice Shanahan as well, who's lighting things up in the Waterford, Club Hurling Championship, like I seen there the other weekend. So it's an interesting one with Waterford, and they do certainly have the options. Would Pádraig Mahoney maybe come back at some stage as well, like after his recent injuries? Obviously, we don't know his situation, but that'd be an interesting one as well for Waterford. So they certainly are. Like, there's definitely a lot of positivity going into next year, no doubt about it. I suppose the only kind of question would be, they do have a very settled squad, and you would wonder, would teams start to figure them out more? But I suppose we thought that this year, and that wasn't the case for Galway and Tipperary. So definitely an interesting one. We'll move on to the sides over in Leinster, and I suppose starting with Antrim. An interesting year for Antrim, like we were saying. Like, they beat Clare on the opening day, they drew at Wexford, beat Laois as well. All those games were at Corrigan Park. I remember even watching them against Kilkenny in the league, and they probably nearly could have won that game as well, and that was away from home. And then in the championship, they just seemed very flat. They lost to Dublin very comfortably. And then against Laois as well, like a result that no one really expected. So an interesting year for Antrim, like good in the league. They'll be in Division 1 hurling again next year, but back down to the Joe McDonagh Cup. So in some ways, they're taking a step forward, but in some ways, they're taking a step back. And I suppose being back in the Joe McDonagh Cup, I suppose, is a huge disappointment for them, considering how well they were in the league.
It is a huge disappointment, and considering, they're one of a few Joe McDonagh Cup teams in Division 1. I suppose that is a positive for Antrim, that they're playing these teams week in, week out. They're challenging themselves and Offaly, Offaly have performed excellent, as we all know, this season. So that'll be a fight next year between Offaly and Antrim, but Antrim, I'm sure, didn't want to get involved in that. I don't know, would you disagree with this rating, Aaron, here? But I've personally gone for a B. I know they performed poorly in the championship, but in the league, they were absolutely outstanding. As you said, the Wexford and Clare results, they should have beaten Kilkenny as well. But look, if they beat Laois in that relegation playoff, I would have given them an A, straight up. But considering they lost to Laois, they got relegated, I'd give them a B. But look, it was positive for Antrim despite going down. Like, I think they can realistically win the Joe McDonagh Cup. They definitely have the players. They have the recruitment there. Darren Gleason, I suppose there's argument Darren Gleason could go down to Tipperary, thinking about it. Someone was saying that on social media. So they could lose their manager there, but hopefully not, because again, like Liam Cahill in Waterford, Darren Gleason is building something there in Antrim, and that'll be a fight. Darren Gleason against Mick Findlay, like 2011 or 2012 all over again between Kilkenny and Tipperary. So look, the Joe McDonagh Cup should be very interesting next year, but I suppose Antrim fans didn't want to be in that situation considering how well they played the league. But overall, because of that Laois result, because they got relegated, I have to go for a B.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've actually gone for a C, funnily enough. So maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on them, but I don't know. I just felt like the way they got beat by Dublin and Laois as well. Like, I just thought that they had more to give, in my opinion, and I felt like they just had a little bit more there. I think they definitely had the quality. And we just didn't quite see it in those two games. And I suppose it is an interesting one. Like, maybe they just expanded all their energy too much on the league. Like, maybe they were so focused on the league and they were so focused on staying in Division 1 that, they kind of just went in with their tails between their legs in the championship a little bit. It's an interesting one. And I suppose looking through some of their top performers, like obviously Neil McManus was very bright, and James McNaughton was another top player for Antrim as well. Like, and I suppose, like what you said before, with them going down to the Joe McDonagh Cup, like they'll be down there with Offaly and Carlow, I suppose, are probably Kerry the closest contenders. But you would give Antrim a very good chance. Like, they'll have been playing Division 1 hurling before going into the Joe McDonagh Cup, so they'll have been playing a higher level opposition. So like, it will stand to them going into the Joe McDonagh Cup, and I would have them as favourites at this moment in time.
Absolutely, and you've seen it with Westmeath this season. Like, they played Division 1 opposition, they challenged Waterford all the way, for example, and they ended up winning the Joe McDonagh Cup, romping Kerry in the final. Like, don't underestimate how important the Division 1 hurling can be contesting against these top counties, because it will improve you as a side. Like, I think Kerry lacked that intensity definitely in the final, and that cost them. Like, you look at Antrim and Offaly, I think you have to look at them as the two favourites for the Joe McDonagh Cup. I know Offaly just came up, but let's be honest, they absolutely romped the Christy Ring Cup this season. So I think they'll be the favourites. I don't know, will Kerry feel the hurt over the last 2 years? Maybe the chance is gone there. Carlow, it's a difficult one with Carlow as well, because they do have the players, they do have the coach doing well in the Carlow Championship, but do they have the mentality to go for a Joe McDonagh Cup challenge? But looking at it overall, I think Antrim and Offaly have to be the favourites to go on and win it, definitely to get to the final. So I suppose Darren Gleason has to take positives that way. There'll most likely be a Croke Park final yet again. And the more you play in Croke Park, the better you'll get. And the more determined you'll get to get up to the top level again. So look, it's going to be competitive as well in Division 1 as well. You look at Laois, Offaly, Antrim. Like, between them three counties, and possibly Wexford, they have a new manager coming in this season. So how good will they be? Dublin, well, I suppose Dublin have improved this season, so maybe the chance is gone there. But there's a lot to be positive about next year for Antrim, but they do have to work hard. maybe not as hard as they worked in the league. They maybe overworked themselves, and look, their championship performance wasn't that great. But look, they'll look to the positives for this year. They'll move on to next year, try stay up at Division 1, and then do well in the Dromedary Cup and try and win that in a fight most likely against Offaly.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. Like, and moving on to Dublin as well, like what we were saying there, like obviously they gave Dublin a good run for their money in the league, but obviously in the championship it was Dublin who comfortably beat them on both days. But like for Dublin, I've given them a C. Like, I suppose it's, they've made some sort of progress this year, like a huge win over Galway in my opinion. But I do think at the same time, like losing to Cork, and then obviously the defeat as well to in the other game as well. I can't remember who was it again? I was Kilkenny in the Leinster final. I suppose they did have the COVID situation, so maybe I'm being a little bit harsh on my own county there. But I don't know. Like, I still feel like we can do a little bit better, and I still feel like I don't know. I feel like a C is generally what I'd go for there.
Jeez, that is actually very interesting. Looking at my notes here, I personally put down an A. I think Dublin did well this season. I don't know, are you being way too hard on your county there, Aaron?
Maybe I am slightly, yeah. Maybe I am a little bit, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just expecting a bit more or something like that. I think because after the Galway win, I thought there was so much promise there. And yeah, fair enough. I actually kind of forgot about the COVID situation off the top of my head. So I suppose when you do consider that, and you didn't have Ronan Hayes, maybe you could bring it up to a B. But I don't know. I just feel like they just didn't quite show, like even in the Cork game as well. Like, fair enough, they kind of came back a little bit towards the end of the game, but I still think like they were always beaten. And yeah, I don't know.
It's very interesting there. And the reason I've actually put them up as an A, like in the game that they weren't affected by the COVID, they obliterated Galway. Well, I suppose Galway didn't perform well this season, but Galway were all other contenders going into it, and that was a superb win for Dublin. And even with the COVID situation, they actually challenged Kilkenny in the first half. So in fairness to them, they did well that way. Cork in the first few minutes, you see Cork obliterate Kilkenny in the semi-finals then. So maybe you could be too hard on Dublin there, but I think the reason they wilted the second half was probably they didn't have the likes of Ronan Hayes or even Fergal Whiteley or Oisin O'Rourke to come onto the pitch. They were huge losses to that Dublin team, and they needed everybody firing. I personally went with an A. I think I'll still stick to an A because I think personally after last year losing, I thought they lost more tamely to Cork last year, the qualifier, in all honesty. Like, I thought they'd put up more of a challenge there. They put up definitely more of a challenge in the quarterfinal until Cork scored the goals and the game was effectively over. So look, I think there is progress in that Dublin team. It goes back to the argument Shane Dowling was saying, they're not overachieving or underachieving, because I suppose, look, they haven't done well over the last few years, but everyone knows about the Dublin money situation and all that. Matty Kenny's in charge. They have the players. They have the youngsters coming through. The under-20s proved that this season after reaching the 2020 final, but how many of those have switched to football? Look at Lee Galan. So that's going to be a problem for Dublin in the next few years. But for now, I'd have to give him an A mainly because of the COVID situation and that historical win over Galway.
Yeah, I feel like if we had got to a semi-final maybe and we had pushed Kilkenny quite closely, then maybe I could have considered an A. But I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like the same old kind of thing for Dublin over in hurling over the past couple of years. Like, fair enough, this year we definitely have made progress. There's no doubt about it. Beating Galway in that game, like there's no two ways in denying that. Like, that definitely was significant progress there. And I suppose in the Kilkenny game, like I was at the game, and we definitely did show a couple of signs of troubling Kilkenny here or there, but never really looked like beating them. Like Matty Kenny as well, do you reckon he stays at Dublin, do you think? I mean, fair enough, like Galway, obviously, if Shane O'Neill's obviously departed there after 2 years in charge, and Matty Kenny's obviously a proud Galway man. He's been up in Dublin for quite a while now. Obviously, done a tremendous job with Coola. Has obviously been in charge of Dublin for the past 2 years. But what do you think? Do you think he stays, or do you think maybe he might see greener pastures at his native Galway?
I was seeing that on Twitter today that he's linked with Galway. That would be very interesting. But you could see why he'd want to go to Galway. He'd want to win. That's probably a more realistic way of winning an All-Ireland. I know Dublin have the resources, blah, 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 etc. But I think the football takes precedence in Dublin. And you know that as any other Dub Aaron, to be honest. Like, I was chatting to Daniel Hussey on the podcast, and he was saying their best hurler plays football, Conor Galan. Superb footballer, but he is a superb hurler. You got Dermot Connolly over the last few years, Cormac Costello, even Lee Gannon. I think he's going to play football. It's inevitable, let's be honest. So I think that way, I don't think it's a realistic game for Dublin to win the All-Ireland, considering the amount of players that just switch to football automatically. Look, I was hearing Davy Fitzgerald might go to Dublin. I don't know what you'd feel about that. Davy Fitz in Matty Kenny to Galway. It's like a hurling merry-go-round in many ways. So, look, it'll be very interesting. Would Matty Kenny go? I could see a reason why he'd want to leave, because Galway, I think, is a more realistic game for an All-Ireland for his CV. No disrespect to Dublin, no, but I think football takes more precedence in the county. So that would be a particular reason. But I suppose, what would you feel about a different manager? Would you rather Matty Kenny, or would you rather someone like Davy Fitz come in for 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, I'd definitely stick with Matty Kenny. All right. I think Matty Kenny's, he's done a great job over the past couple of years. He's brought through the under-20s, and I suppose after Anthony Daly left and Ger Cunningham and whatnot, like, things were looking a little bleak, like bringing Pat Gilroy in as the hurler manager. I thought was quite a bizarre appointment in many ways, considering, he is a football man through and through. And I know sometimes some managers are good at making the switch. Paul Kinnerk, for example, has a brilliant football background, and obviously we see Anthony Cunningham do it with Roscommon, but I thought like there was better options at that moment in time. So I'm not sure. Like, I think if Matty Kenny was to leave, like, originally I was thinking Davy Fitz would be a good show for Dublin, but at the same time, you do, like, it is going to be a rebuilding job. Like, realistically, is Davy Fitz going to win a Leinster title at Dublin, or is he going to, take us on to like, will Dublin be in a better place when he leaves? I'm not too sure. Whereas if it's someone else that comes in maybe for a couple of years, maybe someone like an Eddie Brennan or something like that. I know he recently took the Coola job, but I think he'd be a good option. So it is an interesting one, all right. But with Matty Kenny, like, yeah, like, I see the thing is as well, like, is he realistically going to win anything with Dublin? Like, can he really take them much further than what he can now? Like, fair enough, there's a lot of under-20s coming through, like, but you're looking at best case scenario, maybe you might scrape a Leinster title, but like, surely Galway are going to improve. Kilkenny are always going to be there, Wexford as well. So I mean, it's an interesting one, definitely.
It is. You actually mentioned Eddie Brennan going to Coola there. Well, I suppose that's no guarantee he'll not take the Dublin job, because I even go back to football. Tomás O'Shea took the Offaly job and he was managing Glanmire in Cork. So that's no guarantee that he's going to, stick it out with club. So maybe he'll do a year and maybe he'll get the Dublin job then. And that wouldn't be a bad appointment, actually, because you see what he did with Laois. He improved him game on game, and he was quite unlucky to go out. He went out on bad terms with Laois. Maybe people would disagree with that. Well, most people probably agree that Colin Parkinson was being a bit harsh on him. But that's a good shout, I suppose, Eddie Brennan. And considering Davy Fitz, I'm hearing he lives in Clare now, and he has to, it's going to be hard to commute. That was one of the reasons that he failed with Wexford this season. So Eddie Brennan actually wouldn't be a bad shout. That's if Matty Kenny leaves, of course. But I think he's improved Dublin. He definitely improved them this year. So if they lose Matty Kenny, that'll be a kind of a blow. Maybe one more year, Matty Kenny. But then again, the ship will be gone for the Galway job. So that's for him to decide whether he wants to take that opportunity now or leave it till later on. Like, I'm thinking Eddie Brennan could be with Coola for 2 years. Matty Kenny could have 2 more years at Dublin. And then Eddie Brennan could take the Dublin job just like that. So that'll be very interesting indeed, considering if he gets that club experience and gets the experience in intercounty with Laois, look, anything can happen. Then he's ready to make the step up. We've seen he's a very good manager. So Eddie Brennan, now that you said it, Aaron, is a very interesting candidate for the Dublin job in the next few years.
Yeah, like, and I'm sure Eddie Brennan will probably be touted by other counties probably as well. I'm sure if Brian Cody was to step away in the next couple of years, and maybe if Eddie Brennan did win an All-Ireland with Coola or something like that, maybe he'd be, the next in line, although I'm sure a lot of people would look at Henry Shefflin automatically. I suppose moving on from that, looking at Galway, I mean, I feel like this has to be an F, surely. I mean, lost both games in the championship, their first winless season since 1991 in the championship, which really kind of tells its whole story. And realistically, in both games, like they only really showed up for the last 10 minutes against Waterford, and it was mad because they actually played really, really good hurling, and they started to play really well. Like Evan Nyland was looking very bright, Joe Canning started to look brilliant as well, Brian Concannon started to come into the game, and like when you looked at them through the league, like they beat Limerick quite convincingly in that league game, and you're thinking it's quite mad how they lost both their matches, and I suppose miserably went out of the championship.
Took the words out by Mount Aaron, really. Yeah, I think out of the counties before we recorded, I think there were two in my mind that was bang on 100%. Limerick A, Galway F. Just simple as that. I thought they were very, very poor this year, considering most people touted them as All-Ireland contenders, and they lose to Dublin. No disrespect to Dublin now, but they pushed their standards more than Dublin would, considering the players they have. Look, and Shane O'Neill's now gone. I think that was the right decision, personally. I think, look, he did well last year, but it was an incredible year in many ways with COVID. Maybe he's been unlucky that way because he hasn't really got the fans behind him in a way, and he has to deal with all these regulations. So I suppose he didn't get a fair crack of the whip, maybe, but I suppose it was the right decision. David Fitz now being touted for the Galway job, Micheál Donoghue, like all these managers, all these names come in now, and the question is, where will they go? It's like a jigsaw, the hurling jigsaw in many ways. So look, it was an F, clearly an F. Like Galway, they performed only in the last 10 minutes against Waterford, as you said. Didn't perform whatsoever against Dublin. They were very, very poor. And considering what they did in the league, I found it quite surprising. And the question is, yes, they've very good talent coming through. And Evan Nyland, Brian Concannon, Cathal Mannion, some very good players there. But will they replace, who, Big Joe? Will they replace him in the next few years? That is going to be very, very interesting to see next season.
Yeah, it is interesting. I suppose Evan Nyland can definitely slot in and take the freeze. Anyway, we've seen that. I mean, he was playing in around Joe's position for much of the league campaign, and Joe Cannon was kind of going more into midfield. So definitely a lot of question marks and a lot of interesting ones. All right. And I'd kind of put Galway maybe in a similar bracket to Tipperary in some ways, like both going to have new managers next year. Both going to be in a little bit of transition. I'd say Tipperary more so, with the fact that Galway have some clear, really good young players coming through at the moment. Well, I suppose you could say arguably for both counties, but certainly for Galway anyways, it's definitely going to be a bit of a transition, I'd say, over the next year anyways. Kilkenny, we'll move on to them. I've given them a C. I mean, getting to an All-Ireland semi-final, impressive. And they're thereabouts. Like they're kind of close-ish, of getting over the line. But I suppose at the same time, given Kilkenny's history, I mean, of winning All-Ireland's the most successful team, winning All-Ireland's, like you couldn't really give them higher than a C for losing an All-Ireland semi-final.
Absolutely. I'd give them a C as well. I think, look, I thought Leinster, it was very, very good in 2019. It kind of peaked at 2019. But this season, I think the quality kind of dropped off a bit. So, and then again, in the Leinster final, not that Dublin were a bad side, they were caught with a COVID outbreak. So I suppose Kilkenny, they won that Leinster title maybe a bit too easily. Like against Wexford, they obliterated them in extra time. Look, I'd have to give them a C. Look, against Munster counties, they struggled in league and championship. Like, when you consider the league, yes, they finished top of the group, but the only Munster side they came across, Clare, they lost. Against Cork in the All-Ireland Championship, they lost after extra time. They should have been beaten in normal time, in all honesty. So that's the question. I think the hurling stronghold at the moment is in Munster. They hold all the aces. I don't know about Leinster hurling this year. I thought the quality wasn't particularly there, and considering Dublin had that COVID problem, I don't think the final was a particular showpiece. In all honesty, it was always going to end one way. So, look, a C is probably a fair reflection considering their history. And the last few years have been very, very disappointing. And considering next year will be their 7th year without an All-Ireland, that's a long, long time for Kilkenny. And look, I don't know how they'll recover. The young players don't seem to be that good coming up. I suppose Hugh Lawler's a very good player, Owen Cody, but again, like Limerick, you could say every player on the pitch is top class. You can't say that about Kilkenny at the moment, unfortunately. And yeah, I'd have to give them a C, probably down to the quality of Leinster hurling and the way they lost to the Munster counties this season in the league and the championship.
Yeah, like the underage success definitely doesn't quite seem to be there for Kilkenny at the moment compared with other counties, and maybe we would wonder have other counties maybe caught up to what Kilkenny were doing before, or maybe Kilkenny are trying to stick to what won them so many All-Irelands, and you can understand to why they'd stick to those strategies and whatnot. But like what you said, 7 years now without winning an All-Ireland, I can't think of a time period longer, really. Maybe you'd have to go back to the 90s or something like that, maybe for a longer time period when Kilkenny didn't win an All-Ireland. So it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years. There's no doubt about it. And like what you said, I mean, they do have a good couple of young players coming through, like Owen Cody, Hugh Lawler, and Liam Blanchfield look like a very talented hurler there for a while, but for whatever reason, he can't seem to get off the bench. So I'm not too sure what's going on there. And they like from watching them as well in the Cork game and last year as well, like they don't seem to have that kind of bite that Kilkenny teams would normally have in the past. Like normally you'd see Kilkenny fight, okay, fair enough, they did fight back from the dead against Cork in extra time, but I feel like an older Kilkenny side of maybe 6-7 years ago would have went on to win that game, whereas this Kilkenny side, they seem to have a bit of it, but they're just not quite the finished article.
They are, they aren't whatsoever. And even you go back to the underage success in Kilkenny, it isn't great. Like even they were Leinster champions in 2019 and the Munster finalist Cork obliterated them. In all honesty, they hammered them out the gate. And look, I think Adrian Mullen is another player. Looking at it, he's a very good young player coming through. But other than that, it's very, very hard to look at this Kilkenny team and just say he's a star in that position or he's a star in that position. They're an average team, let's be honest, Aaron. They aren't that great. They won't strike fear into the likes of even Cork, Waterford, Limerick over the next few years. I just think they're just there now. Yes, they'll be there and thereabouts. They always will for All-Irelands. For God's sake, they are Kilkenny after all. But I just don't think the players are quite there. I think Brian Cody might be working wonders with the players he has. I don't think the development line is quite there. And it's definitely showing out in the pitch against particularly Munster sides. Waterford in 2020, Limerick in 2019 obliterated. They should have won that game. And Cork in 2021. So I think it probably be a few bleak years for Kilkenny in the next few years. But for now, C is probably a fair reflection. The Leinster hurling wasn't great now this year. And look, we could see Kilkenny go backwards, and we'll have to see how long Brian Cody has left in the tank being the Kilkenny manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would expect Brian Cody probably to stay on for another couple of years. I feel like with the way Kilkenny kind of changed their style a little bit this year and some of the changes he made in the league, like it would be a little bit surprising if he was to step away now. And I feel like we would have probably heard about it by now if he was going to go and step away. As for Wexford, obviously they were one of the teams that were beaten by Kilkenny in the Leinster Championship. Just one championship win this year, and that was against Laois. They lost to Kilkenny, and then obviously they were beaten by Clare in that qualifier game as well. Like they showed some fight against Kilkenny. I thought they were really impressive that day. On another day, could have won that game. And it's mad how the championship opened up. Maybe you could have been talking about Wexford getting to an All-Ireland semi-final then, having played Dublin, who obviously had a lot of COVID cases in that final. So, and they did show a bit of promise against Clare in the second half. But I suppose all in all, just another disappointing year for Wexford. And obviously Davy Fitz has stepped away now. He's no longer the Wexford senior hurling manager, and I suppose a disappointing year for the Yellow Bellies.
It is a disappointing year considering the talent they have in that team. But I suppose 2019 they peaked winning Leinster, and that was their chance of reaching All-Ireland final. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Look, it was a weird year for Wexford. Like against Laois, they absolutely obliterated them. I watched that game personally. Kilkenny, look, I thought they were poured off in extra time. They wore out. And then against Clare, they just weren't out of the traps quick enough, and that cost them the game eventually. Personally, I'd probably give him a D, slightly under expectations, but way off it as well. I think most Wexford people will be expecting at least a quarter-final appearance. They didn't get that this year with the players they have. That was a disappointing aspect. And now to bring you Tipperary coach as their manager, that should be very interesting looking at next year. I personally didn't see it coming whatsoever. I don't know how he'll get on being the top dog in the dugout. Like, yes, he was part of that All-Ireland winning team with Liam Sheedy and Eamon O'Shea in 2019, but you've even seen with Keith O'Neill going to Kildare being the top job at that, other than Newbridge or Dover, didn't work after he won the All-Ireland with Kerry being their backroom team. So usually these sorts of things don't work too well. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in that situation with Wexford. But for this season, I'd probably give them a D, slightly under expectations.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there as well. I've gone for a D as well. Like, you could give them an F with the fact that, you know, they only, well, all due respect, like they beat Laois, obviously, but, you know, they did show, like, they were very impressive against Kilkenny in that game. Like, they did play well. It wasn't like last year where they were really steamrolled in both their two games. And even against Clare in the second half, they did show what they could do. It just seemed that in the first half against Clare, they were extremely poor. And like what you said there with Darragh Egan coming in, I mean, it's definitely an interesting appointment, no doubt about it. I mean, I would have thought maybe they would have went with John Moyler, maybe. Obviously he's a former Cork manager, but he's obviously doing a lot of work in at St. Martin's, I believe it is there. So he would have been an interesting shout. But I suppose Darragh Egan is the man they've brought in, and it will be interesting to keep an eye on Wexford now next year.
Will be very interesting. You mentioned it there, Aaron, thank God, because I couldn't remember the guy's name, literally. So it tells you how interesting this appointment is. And John Moyler mentioning that, I would have thought he'd step up and become the new Wexford manager. Maybe even Liam Dunn making a comeback. I would have expected that maybe. But this guy coming out of Tipperary, Darragh Egan, I don't know about him, to be honest. I don't know, is he cut out to be the top dog in management? Will he deal with, the big players in that Wexford team, the likes of Rory O'Connor, Conor McDonald and Lee Chin? They'll make him settle in, no doubt about that, but I don't know, will there be even a semi-final appearance in this Wexford team over the next few years? It should be very interesting to see this develop, but I personally see maybe at most a quarter-final appearance next season. But even with these group of young, very good players, young, hungry players, that'll probably be under expectations as well with this Wexford team. I think Wexford people probably want an All-Ireland, considering they haven't won one since the 90s, 96, I think it is. So that's a very long time for a proud GAA county. So they'd want an All-Ireland. I don't think it's going to come even within the next 10 years, to be honest. So I think this Wexford team is kind of on the way down. Davy Fitz did as much as he could with this Wexford team. And I don't know, would this appointment strike fear into opponents or strike confidence into Wexford fans? But nevertheless, it should be very interesting going to 2022.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, all right. It's nearly like maybe they, kind of used up all their budget with Davy Fitz, and maybe they've kind of gone for a much more cheaper option or something like that. Maybe he didn't fit within the budget, the Wexford County Board budget or something like that. But we'll see what happens, anyways. Moving on from that, Laois. I mean, given where they were at the start of the year, like they had a lot of very bad performances at the start of the year in the league. They were, obviously hammered by Wexford in the championship. Things were looking quite bleak. Got that win over Antrim, a huge win, their first win of the year. And then against Waterford, they actually were leading against Waterford going into the final few minutes, and you were actually thinking they could pull off a massive shock here. Obviously, Waterford turned it around, won the game, but I've gone for a B in the end. I think they, an impressive enough year by their standards. They stay in Division 1 hurling, they stay in the All-Ireland Senior Hurling Championship as well. So given where they were at the start of the year, and given what we'd seen last year as well, given the fact that Eddie Brennan stepped away, I think impressive enough from Laois.
Impressive enough the way they recovered, I suppose, but I've actually gone under that, Aaron. I've gone for a C. I just think with the players Laois have, I think there was more in that team. And considering what happened in the league at the start of the year, what happened against Wexford, that annihilation. But then they started to turn it on against Antrim, Waterford and Westmeath, the last 3 games really. And I don't know, does that make a summer whatsoever? I don't think it does. I think it kind of papered over the cracks and what was happening, what the performances were in the league and the game against Wexford. Yes, Wexford were outstanding, but Laois were well off at that night, and Wexford absolutely hammered them. So I suppose they beat Antrim, but I suppose when you look at it, Westmeath, they only just got over the line as well. Like I think Westmeath had a man sent off, if or was it Laois, or one of them, or maybe both of them had a man sent off. So it was a bit of a crazy game. Waterford, they could have won that, but they could have won against Clare last season. So I suppose they have the fire in the belly when things go tough. But from the start, they don't seem to be at it. Like they weren't at it against Dublin in the championship last season. Yes, Dublin, Donald Burke was outstanding that night, but they weren't at it from the start and they paid the heavy price for that. So I think that's where Laois need to improve next year. They need to go full tilt from the start and I suppose save a bit of energy towards the end. Like Antrim exposed all their energy and it cost them. I suppose Laois need to conserve a small bit of energy towards the end, but overall I'd give them a C in line with expectations. They stayed up in the Liam McCarthy. They weren't impressive in the first few games and they saved their season with a couple of good performances.
Yeah, and I suppose Patrick Purcell, he was kind of one of the main players who really stood out for Laois. I felt he scored 1-4, I think, in that Waterford game. Very impressive stuff. We'll move on to some of the John McDonagh Cup teams. We'll run through these. I suppose Westmeath, first of all, obviously not beaten, I should say. They won the John McDonagh Cup. And obviously they were beaten by Laois, so they'll be in Division 2 hurling next year. But I've gone for a B in the end. Like they done what was needed. You could argue maybe they should get an A by the fact that they won the John McDonagh, but I do think at the same time getting relegated from Division 1, I do think it kind of balances itself out. So I suppose they done what was needed in terms of winning the John McDonagh Cup. What do you think?
I've personally given Westmeath an A. I think, look, they got relegated for Division 1, but let's not forget, look at the group they were in. Munster teams and Galway. You look, Cork, Galway, Tipperary, Limerick. Like, how on earth are you supposed to get points out of that? And Waterford as well, they actually put up a challenge against Waterford. In fairness to them, they only lost by 3 points. Fair play to them. And against Cork, they lost actually 2 players early on. I think one of the many was Davy Glennon. That was a huge loss for them. Against Tipperary, well, I suppose they got hammered in the other games, but they lost a few key players. I think Josh Call did well this season for a young player. Scored, I think, 3 or 4 points against Cork, and he did well to be on the losing side, scoring that score for himself. And then the Joe McDonagh, I think they did what was needed. They won the Joe McDonagh Cup pretty comprehensively against Kerry. It was a complete performance, let's not forget. I suppose it was overshadowed by the height of the Leinster final coming after that. So I'd give Westmeath an A personally. They did what was needed. They won the Joe McDonagh Cup. And they were competitive against the likes of Waterford and Cork for a few minutes in the games in Division 1. And let's not forget Kieran Doyle's point, the first day back from COVID. That'll be replayed long into next year or the year after. And I suppose the relegation playoff, I thought they were a bit unlucky to lose to Laois. And considering Laois or Liam McCarthy side, look, they lost to 7 Liam McCarthy, or was it 6 Liam McCarthy sides. Laois pretty narrowly. On another day they could have won. So overall, I'd give them an A. I think it was a decent season for Westmeath.
And as for Kildare, I suppose we'll touch on them. Obviously, like Westmeath, when they played Kildare, actually Kildare gave them quite a good run for their money, and Kildare have obviously got a good kind of underage setup kind of at the moment, like a good couple of under 20 players coming through at the moment. But I suppose losing to Meath, I mean, that kind of really would have set them back. I mean, everything was perfect in the league, and their 2 performances against Carlow and Westmeath were perfect, and then they go and get beaten by Meath. Obviously a huge win for Meath, and we'll get on for them in a moment. But what have you gone for with Kildare?
It's actually a tough one with Kildare because in the league, I watched one of their matches against Donegal. They were outstanding in that division, and they put it up to people in the Joe McDonagh Cup. They were absolutely brilliant, and the conveyor belt's hand is clearly there. Johnny Byrne seems to be a very good player from centre forward for Kildare. Brian Bird, a corner forward. Look, they have some very good players coming through, and they have very good manager, David Heresy. It all looks good for the future in Kildare. I've personally gone for a C. I think they were expected to go down in most people's books. Like you look at Meath were probably the next team to probably go down, and they lost to Meath in the end. So I suppose a C, road in the middle. They have some nice players coming through. I think there'll be positives going to the Christy Ring next season, considering who's in it. Like you look at Mayo, Derry, Sligo. So I suppose there is positives there. They could go up again. Like they have the youngsters coming through, and yeah, Kildare Hurling seems to be on the up. I'd give them a C in line with expectations, really.
Yeah, I'd go with a C as well. I think obviously losing to Meath, I mean, fair enough. But I think, given their entirety of their 2021 season, I think they were fairly impressive. And I watched some of that Donegal game as well, and even Jack Sheridan as well as another top class hurler in that Kildare side. I suppose speaking of Meath, I mean, they got that incredible win over Kildare, like we were saying before, and some very disappointing performances in the league, and even in the John McDonald Cup at different stages as well. Like they were beaten by Down, I believe, as well, from what I remember. So I mean, they then go and produce a huge win over Kildare, winning by 10 points. So I've gone for a B in the end. To stay in the John McDonald Cup, I think is a big achievement for them. And I mean, it'd be very tough for them to stay up there next year, no doubt about that. But for this year, anyway, I think brilliant stuff for Meath.
I think it was brilliant stuff for Meath as well. I've actually gone for a B as well. I think, look, they don't have the quality of players as the likes of Carlow, for example, do, or Kerry do, or even Kildare. I think Kildare have slightly better players than Meath all over the pitch. So to beat them by 10 points, brilliant performance, and well done to Meath for staying up. I'd probably give them a B as well. I suppose some aspects of their season were disappointing, but the main thing is they stayed up at the Joe McDonald Cup for another season. But what I will say, next season is going to be very, very hard for them, because Offaly's coming to town next season. They're going to, you see them with the Christy Ring, they obliterated everybody by 40 points or plus. And you look at Mick Fenley in charge, Owen Cahill was on form this year. They are a coming team. I suppose it will be down to, Meath down maybe to go down to the Christy Ring Cup next season. So it will be tough for Meath, but for now, I'd give them a B, yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of Down, I mean, I've given them a B as well. I mean, they nearly made the Joe McDonald Cup final in the end. Like they beat Kerry actually in that final league game, but they had to beat them by a certain margin. I think it was like 4 or 5 points or something like that, and they didn't quite do so. But they still did win the game, which was fairly impressive. And Paul Sheehan looks like a top class hurler there at the moment. And I suppose, like, I feel like maybe they're a little underrated, a little bit, like maybe Down. Like I feel like a lot of people are looking at some of the other counties sometimes and thinking, oh, well, maybe Down will get relegated, maybe because they're an Ulster team, and traditionally, Ulster sides haven't been that good in hurling and Down in particular. But I think the work that they're doing in particular is very impressive. Like the fact that they're solidifying themselves in Joe McDonald Cup. And people forget that last year they beat Offaly in the Christy Ring. Like they're a good team, and I mean, a lot of people might have them as contenders to go down as well next year. But I think in general, like there's a lot of good work being done in Down at the moment in terms of hurling.
Yeah, I was actually gonna go for C there, but now that you mentioned this, probably a B, considering they stayed up, considering they beat Kerry, and considering they're an Ulster, which really, despite what Buff Egan says in these stories, it's not a hurling stronghold. Maybe Antrim is, but around that really isn't. Like they're predominantly football, and to put themselves on the map in hurling, it's absolutely brilliant. And considering the young players coming through in football as well, to do it in both codes for a county like Down, good achievement, and some good work's been done up there. So I'd probably go for B as well. I think to stay up was brilliant, but as you rightly said, Offaly coming up next season, it's going to be a battle between them and Meath to stay up. Looking at performances this year, I think Down might have the slight edge, but we'll have to see next season. But for now, yeah, I'd go for B. Like for Ulster hurling, they've done absolutely brilliantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, and as you were saying, like they beat Kerry, and I suppose for Kerry, like it's hard to know really. Like, fair enough, they made the John McDonald Cup final, but they're kind of another team where you're like, have they progressed from last year? Probably not. I mean, they were in a group with Meath and Down. If they were in the other group with Carlow, Westmeath, or you were to swap some teams around, would they have went on to make the final? I suppose that's a big question. Like I've gone for a C. I think still getting to a final should be still somewhat commended. Like they did still get to the Joe McDonagh Cup final, but like looking at next year as well in 2022, like I think they'll be okay in terms of fighting off any relegation, but in terms of going for promotion, I think it's going to be very tough because, like what you said, you've Antrim in there, you've Offaly coming up, Carlow will probably regroup as well. So, I mean, it's going to be tough for them.
It is going to be tough for them. I've personally gone for a B. I don't know, is that been too nice to Kerry? Well, that's very unusual for me, as you know, but I suppose, look, Kerry is a football stronghold. It's not really a hurling stronghold. It's only really the north of Kerry. I wouldn't be shocked if some people in Kerry don't know what a hurley is, in all honesty. Like, it's all football down there. They live and breathe Gaelic football. Like, I think there's only 8 North Kerry clubs, and they're at this level in hurling, just below the Liam McCarthy. Like, people have to take that into consideration. Like, look, Fintan O'Connor over the last few years, he stepped down now, but he's done an absolutely brilliant job with this Kerry team. And to have players like Shane Conway and Mikey Boyle, to have these players playing for Kerry, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And look, I'd honestly love Kerry to perform well in hurling. It takes a bit of interest off the football for just a small bit. They could have done it in the last few years. Like, I was hearing Paul Galvin and Emmett Fitzmaurice were excellent hurlers back in their day, but obviously for obvious reasons they chose football. But I'd give him a B because it is tough in Kerry every year. The fans are behind the footballers. Hurling's really put to one side. There's 8 clubs. They're overachieving, in all honesty. And I'd probably give him a B. There is some Kerry kids now picking up the hurling stick, which is absolutely brilliant because hurling should be developed more in Kerry. And you see, Buff Egan is a Kerry man himself, and he'd want to develop hurling more. So I suppose for the county that's in it to reach 2 Joe McDonagh Cup finals in a row, just below the Liam McCarthy, just off it, I'd give them a B because, firstly, I think they're punching above their weight.
Yeah, it is a fair point as well. Like when you kind of factor that all in, like the fact that I suppose, that there isn't that many clubs in Kerry like that do play hurling. Like I didn't really think of that myself, so it probably is a good point. I suppose for Carlow, like they're an interesting one. Like I'll be honest, I haven't really seen a whole lot of Carlow, to be honest. I've kind of seen them a little bit on the Sunday game and a few YouTube highlights here and there. Like I suppose Marty Kavanagh, obviously that was a huge injury and he was unavailable for the Joe McDonagh Cup. Like, and against Westmeath, like beaten by 5 points. I didn't see any of the game now, to be perfectly honest, but it was only 5 points in it. So I'm sure they were, touch and go with Westmeath. They were leading at one point from what I seen. So, I mean, I've gone for a C. Like, I feel like it's been okay, like fair enough for them. They haven't got relegated or anything like that. They weren't in a relegation battle. Fair enough, they didn't make the Joe McDonagh Cup final, but they were in a tough group. Like if they had been in Kerry, like if you had to swapped Carlow and Kerry around, for example, I mean, Carlow probably might have made the final, although I think Down actually beat Carlow in the league, so maybe not. But yeah, it's an interesting one. What have you gone for?
I've personally gone lower. I've gone D. Personally, I think Carlow over the last few years have been in the Liam McCarthy Cup and have been constantly in that. Like, you look at the managers they've brought in, the backroom team, the players they have. I think Carlow should be doing a lot better, in all honesty. I don't know, is that an interesting point to you there, but I just think they've performed well in the Liam McCarthy. They were in Division 1, let's not forget. They were in Division 1 in 2020. Let's not forget that. They actually challenged sides like Dublin and Laois in Division 1. So I personally give them a D. Like, it's been way too long since Carlow have been outside that hurling stronghold, and they need to get back there as soon as possible. And to finish, I think it was 4th in the group. In this group, I think it's very poor for the tradition of hurling in Carlow. I think it's very poor, in all honesty. And hopefully they'll get back up because Carlow is passionate about their hurling. Like, obviously, I had Marty Kavanagh on the podcast recently, and you could see they are passionate about their hurling up there. And you look at the clubs they have in Mount Leinster Rangers or a few other dim clubs, like they're competitive in the Leinster Club Championship. So the talent is there in Carlow. I'd give him a D. I don't know, is that a bit mean for Carlow, but I expect a lot more from them personally.
Yeah, I suppose it is a fair point. I just think with the Marty Kavanagh injury, it might have been a tough one for Carlow this year in particular. But yeah, like what you said before, I think for next year there'll definitely be a lot of soul searching anyways. And I suppose Mount Leinster Rangers. I think they got to a Leinster final or won a Leinster or something like that in the past 10 years. I remember hearing about it anyway. So it will be interesting to see what happens with them. I suppose just touching on, we'll just run through the Offaly really, to be honest. I mean, Offaly, Mayo and Fermanagh, they all won their respective lower tier competitions. Like Offaly won the Christie Ring, Mayo won the Nicky Rackard, and Fermanagh obviously won the Laurie Mar. Like all three counties get A's in my book, and I'm sure you'd probably agree. But we'll touch on Offaly. Like, I mean, huge progress for them this year. A lot going right, both on and off the pitch with Shane Lowry and with the footballers as well. And I suppose, you know, not just winning the Christie Ring Cup as well, but they completely obliterated all the teams they played against, and also as well got promoted from Division 2. So like to play Division 1 hurling next year, like it would be very interesting to see how they get on there.
Should be very, very interesting to see how they get on, and see, look at the youngsters coming through in that Offaly team, the players they already have in Owen Cahill and Liam Langton, some experienced players like Ben Keneally and Shane Dooley there as well. Look, the future is very, very bright for Offaly, and you see it with Big Fedley, you see it even with Eddie Brennan. If a sort of a legend comes in to a smaller county, Darren Gleason as well, they'll just get a bounce off the players completely. And it seems to be that way for Offaly. And look, we need Offaly back at the top table, because as recently as 2013, they challenged Kilkenny all the way. They scored 4 goals against Kilkenny, if many people remember that game. Joe Bergen, I think, scored twice, and Shane Dooley scored a handful of points or something. But that was an incredible performance. And to think now they were in the Christie Ring Cup, like that's pretty damn low for Offaly. They were in the Christie Ring Cup for 2 seasons running, which is like it's unheard of. And look, they won all their games. Maybe people might suggest they shouldn't be in that position in the first place, but they did what they needed to do. They got up to Division 1 and they got up to the Joe McDonagh. And they're now, in my eyes, they're the favourites to win the Joe McDonagh Cup next year, and deservedly so, because they're a superb outfit. Mick Fennelly seems to be doing a good job there, and definitely, without doubt, I'll give him an A.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd have to go with that as well. I think it's been a tremendous year for them, like obviously being promoted from Division 1, and a lot of pressure on them as well, like obviously going in this year considering last year, and a lot of people asking a lot of questions of management. And what's actually interesting is they haven't even made that many changes to their panel or to their management. They've just played players in different positions and tested a few different things out and played a little bit more on the front foot. So I think massive congratulations to Offaly anyway for sealing that promotion. I suppose on a side note, we'll just run through Hurler of the Year and Young Hurler of the Year before we finish up. Like, who would you have as Hurler of the Year in your book?
It's an obvious one for me, Cian Lynch. Superb. Like, the guy is an absolute baller, and he showed it especially in the All-Ireland final. The guy is integral to Limerick. Yes, the Limerick players all over the pitch are just unbelievable, but I think this guy is just magic. He's Harry, as someone might describe him, he's Harry Potter on the slitter with a stick in his hand. Superb. Absolutely superb. And Kieran Carey would definitely be proud of this guy. He's such a superb talent, and he tied with Cork in the All-Ireland final, especially, without a doubt for me. I know Kyle Hayes performed well, and I suppose Nicky Quaid might be up there, Declan Hannon for his performances, Peter Casey, but have to give it for Cian Lynch. Superb hurler. That's all that needs to be said, really.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard to go against Cian Lynch. I mean, I'd look at Dan Morrissey maybe as well. I feel like he deserves a big shout considering how well Limerick have played and how defensively well they played, especially his performance against Patrick Horgan in that All-Ireland final. I thought was tremendous, like when they were throwing or floating a lot of long balls into him. But yeah, I don't think you can really argue too much against Cian Lynch in all honesty. I mean, he's just a wizard on the ball, and in many ways, and the Ronaldinho of hurling is what I've heard as well, like a tremendous hurler. I suppose for Young Hurler of the Year, I think Jack O'Connor is probably a good bet here for Cork. I mean, very impressive stuff, and could very well be in contention for an all-star himself as well, and a tremendous year for him.
Superb year for him. And I suppose in 2018, I said to my fellow Cork fans, this is the guy to change Cork hurling. Like, most people laughed at that comment, but I've seen him for Sarsfields down through the years. The guy is an absolute goal getter. He gets the ball, he runs straight towards goal. And that's what Cork fans needed over the last few years. And we got it finally this year when he started getting more game time. And what a season. what a season. Maybe he was marked out of the game against Limerick, but that's testament to how well the Limerick backs did on him. But that goal against Kilkenny will go down long into the memory, and superb performance for Jack O'Connor. I suppose a few other Cork players, Shane Barrett, when he came into the fray, did well enough. Owen Cody might be considered again this year. I suppose Limerick players maybe a bit too old for this award. So I suppose Jack O'Connor would be the obvious candidate. Maybe there's others in there, maybe Mark Rogers for Clare or Aidan McCarthy, some very good young players there. But Jack O'Connor for me as well, superb talent.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that as well. I think Jack O'Connor is definitely my pick anyways. But yeah, cheers anyway, Matthew, for coming on. I'll link down your podcast down below for anyone to go ahead and check it out on Spotify and your Instagram page as well. So yeah, cheers Matthew for coming on, and cheers for your time.
Thanks very much, Aaron.